The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink as Emma stood by the kitchen window. She wiped her hands on her apron and smiled at the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Thomas was home. 15 years of marriage had not dimmed the small flutter in her heart when she heard his key in the lock. Emma turned from the stove where dinner simmered, ready to greet him with their usual kiss. But today was different. Thomas walked in with heavy steps and a face that looked like it carried the weight of the world. He didn't hang up his coat or loosen his tie as he always did. Instead, he stood in the doorway of their kitchen, his eyes finding hers with an intensity that made Emma's smile fade. "Tom, what's wrong?" Emma moved toward him, concern replacing the warmth in her chest. Thomas took a deep breath. "We need to talk, Em." His voice was soft but serious. "Can we sit down?" Fear crept into Emma's mind as she followed him to their small dining table. In 15 years of ups and downs, she had never seen this particular expression on her husband's face. Thomas reached across the table and took her hands in his. His touch was warm and familiar, a small comfort against the growing worry. "Robert died last night," he said finally. "Heart attack. They couldn't save him." Emma gasped. Robert was Thomas's coworker and friend. They weren't close outside of work, but Thomas spoke of him often, especially about how proud Robert was of his 2 daughters. "That's terrible," Emma whispered, squeezing Thomas's hands. "Was it sudden?" Thomas nodded, his eyes dropping to their joined hands. "Very. No warning at all." Emma waited. There was more. She could feel it in the tension of his fingers against hers. "His daughters," Thomas continued after a moment. "Lisa and Kate, they have no one, Em." The room grew quiet except for the soft bubbling of the forgotten pot on the stove. Emma watched her husband's face, seeing the mix of sorrow and something else. Determination, perhaps. "Their mother died 3 years ago," Thomas explained. "And Robert had no siblings, his parents are gone. There's a distant cousin somewhere overseas, but the authorities haven't been able to reach them yet." Emma's heart ached for the girls she had never met. "How old are they?" 14 and 16, Thomas said. He looked up then, his blue eyes meeting hers with a look that took Emma back to the day he had proposed, nervous but certain. "They need a place to stay, Em. Just until arrangements can be made." The meaning behind his words slowly dawned on her. "You want them to stay with us?" Thomas nodded, his grip on her hands tightening slightly. "I know it's a lot to ask. Our house isn't big, and we've never had children." His voice trailed off, the unspoken reminder of their own inability to have children hanging in the air between them. Emma's mind raced. Their quiet, orderly life would certainly change with 2 grieving teenagers in the house. What did she know about raising teenage girls? What would they need? How would they all fit in their modest 3-bedroom home? "Where are they now?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "In temporary care. They're scared, Em. They've lost everything." Emma looked around their kitchen at the life they had built together. It wasn't perfect, but it was filled with love. Perhaps that was exactly what these girls needed most. Thomas watched her face, patient as always. He never pushed, never demanded. It was one of the countless reasons she had fallen in love with him and stayed in love through 15 years of marriage. "How soon?" she asked, her decision made even as the question left her lips. Relief flooded Thomas's tired face. 2 days. They can come in 2 days if that works for us." Emma stood up and moved around the table. Thomas turned in his chair, and she settled onto his lap, resting her forehead against his. "Yes," she whispered. "We'll make it work." Thomas wrapped his arms around her waist, holding her close. "I love you," he murmured against her hair. "I know this isn't what we planned, but when I heard about those girls, all I could think was that we have room in our home. Maybe we have room in our hearts too." Emma kissed him softly, feeling the familiar warmth of his love alongside the new, tentative excitement of the unknown journey ahead. "You've always had the biggest heart," she said. "It's why I married you. And yes, I think we have plenty of room." That night, as they lay in bed making plans, Emma wondered what the girls would be like, if they would accept her, if she could provide what they needed. But when she looked at Thomas's peaceful sleeping face, she knew that together, they could face whatever challenges came their way. Love had carried them through 15 years. Perhaps now it was time for that love to grow in ways they had never imagined. Emma spent the next 2 days in a whirlwind of activity. She cleaned the spare bedroom, adding fresh sheets and finding extra pillows. She bought 2 small desk lamps, thinking the girls might want to read at night. Thomas brought home a second dresser from a yard sale, and together they made space for 2 young lives about to enter their home. "Do you think they like chicken?" Emma asked as she made a shopping list. "Should I get more cereal?" Thomas smiled at her nervous energy. "I'm sure whatever you cook will be perfect," he said, kissing her cheek as he passed. "They'll just need time to adjust." The morning the girls were due to arrive, Emma woke up early. She made cinnamon rolls, remembering how she had loved them as a teenager. The sweet smell filled the house, making it feel warm and welcoming, at least she hoped. Thomas found her rearranging the pillows on the couch for the 3rd time. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "They'll be okay, Em. We'll all be okay." Emma leaned back into his embrace, drawing strength from his steady presence. "I just want them to feel welcome, to feel safe." The doorbell rang at exactly 11 o'clock. Emma smoothed her dress and took a deep breath. Thomas squeezed her hand, and together they opened the door. A tired-looking woman in a gray suit stood on their porch. Beside her were 2 girls with small suitcases. The older one, Kate, had long dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She stood straight, her face a careful mask. The younger one, Lisa, had lighter hair cut short around her face. She kept her eyes on the ground, one hand holding the sleeve of her sister's jacket. "Mr. and Mrs. Clark," the woman said. "I'm Ms. Jenkins from Child Services. These are Kate and Lisa Morgan." The introductions were formal and awkward. Ms. Jenkins handed them a folder with important papers, promised to check in soon, and then she was gone. The 4 of them stood in the entryway, the silence heavy with unspoken feelings. "Your room is upstairs," Emma said finally, her voice sounding too bright even to her own ears. "Would you like to see it?" Kate nodded, her arm protectively around her sister's shoulders as they followed Emma up the stairs. Thomas carried their suitcases, saying something about the house being old but comfortable. Emma showed them the bathroom they would share, the closet with extra blankets, the bedroom with its twin beds and new desk lamps. "The blue dresser is for your things," Emma explained, pointing. "And we put some towels on your beds. The purple ones are Lisa's, and the green ones are Kate's." She paused, suddenly unsure. "Unless you prefer different colors." "These are fine. Thank you," Kate said formally. It was the first time she had spoken since arriving. "I'll let you get settled," Emma said. "Lunch will be ready in about half an hour. Nothing fancy, just sandwiches and soup." She closed the door behind her, giving them privacy. She found Thomas waiting in the hallway, his face concerned. "They're so quiet," Emma whispered. Thomas put his arm around her waist. "They're grieving, Em. And everything is strange for them right now." Lunch was a silent affair. The girls ate little, answering questions with short, polite responses. Kate kept her eyes on her sister, as if making sure she was okay. Lisa didn't look up from her bowl of soup. That evening, Emma knocked softly on their door with 2 mugs of hot chocolate. The girls were sitting on their beds, Kate reading a book, Lisa just staring at the wall. "I thought you might like something warm before bed," Emma said, setting the mugs on the small table between the beds. "There are extra blankets in the closet if you get cold. The house can be drafty at night." "Thank you," Kate said, setting down her book. "You've been very kind." Emma wanted to say more, to somehow bridge the gap between them, but the words wouldn't come. "Well, good night then," she said instead. "We're just down the hall if you need anything." Later that night, Emma lay awake beside Thomas, listening. The house felt different with 2 more people in it, even quiet ones. "I heard crying," she whispered to Thomas, "earlier when I passed their room." Thomas turned to face her in the darkness. "Did you go in?" Emma shook her head. "I didn't know if I should. I'm not their mother." The word hung between them, filled with meaning. Thomas reached for her hand under the covers. "No, but you're here. Sometimes that's enough to start with." Emma squeezed his hand, thinking of the 2 girls down the hall, alone in a strange house with people they barely knew. "I hope so," she said softly. "I really hope so." Outside, rain began to fall, tapping gently against the windows. Emma listened to its steady rhythm and to Thomas's breathing as he drifted off to sleep. Tomorrow, she thought, Tomorrow she would try again to reach them. The first week passed in a fog of awkward silences and careful politeness. Emma tried her best to make the girls feel at home, but each attempt seemed to hit an invisible wall. She bought Lisa a new sketchbook after noticing her doodling on napkins. She found a mystery novel for Kate, having seen her finish the book she brought with her. Both gifts were met with quiet thanks, then set aside. Thomas came home later and later each evening. Work, he said, though Emma knew better. He was giving her space to connect with the girls, but she felt increasingly alone in the house that now seemed both too small and too empty at the same time. One evening, after Thomas called to say he would miss dinner again, Emma set 3 plates on the table and sighed. The pasta she had made was nothing special, but she had hoped they might all eat together. "Is everything okay?" Kate's voice startled her. The girl stood in the kitchen doorway, watching Emma with those careful eyes that seemed to miss nothing. "Yes, just Thomas working late again," Emma answered, forcing a smile. "Dinner's ready if you and Lisa want to eat." Kate nodded, then hesitated. "Lisa isn't feeling well. She's in our room." Alarm flashed through Emma. "What's wrong? Is she sick?" Kate shrugged, but there was tension in her shoulders. "She just doesn't want to come down." Emma followed Kate upstairs to find Lisa curled on her bed, facing the wall. Her small body was shaking slightly. "Lisa?" Emma said softly, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Are you not feeling well?" When Lisa turned, her face was streaked with tears. "It's Dad's birthday," she whispered, her voice breaking. "We always made him chocolate cake." Emma felt her heart crack open. In all the arrangements and adjustments, she hadn't thought to ask about important dates. "Oh honey," she said, the endearment slipping out naturally. "I'm so sorry." Lisa's tears came faster now, her small body racked with sobs. Without thinking, Emma gathered the girl in her arms. For a moment, Lisa stiffened, then collapsed against Emma's shoulder, crying as if her heart would break. Kate stood by the door, her own eyes wet. "I told her we could make a cake," she said, "for memory's sake. But we don't know where anything is in your kitchen." Emma looked at Kate over Lisa's head. "Then let's make one together." An hour later, the kitchen was a mess of flour and cocoa powder. A lopsided chocolate cake cooled on the counter. Lisa's tears had dried, and she was carefully mixing frosting in a bowl. Kate measured coffee to add to the mix, explaining that their dad had always liked mocha flavor. When Thomas finally came home, he found them all at the table, eating cake for dinner. Emma saw the question in his eyes as he took in the scene. "It's Robert's birthday," she said simply. Thomas nodded, understanding immediately. He hung up his coat and joined them, accepting a large slice of cake without comment about the unusual dinner. Later, after the girls had gone to bed, Emma and Thomas sat together on the couch, her head on his shoulder as she told him about the evening. "She cried for so long, Tom," Emma said. "I felt so helpless." Thomas stroked her hair gently. "But you weren't helpless. You made a cake." Emma smiled despite herself. "A very ugly cake." "The best kind," Thomas said, kissing the top of her head. "The kind made with love." That night, as Emma passed the girls' room on her way to bed, she heard soft voices. She paused, not wanting to eavesdrop, but curious about what they might say when alone. "She's nice," she heard Lisa say. "Emma, I mean, she smells like flowers." "We can't get attached," Kate's voice was firm. "We won't be here long." "But what if we want to stay?" Lisa asked, her voice small and hopeful. There was a long pause. "We'll see," Kate said finally, her voice softer than Emma had ever heard it. "Get some sleep now." Emma continued to her room, her heart both heavy and light. Thomas was already in bed, reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed work documents. He looked up when she came in, his eyes searching her face. "They're talking," Emma said, sitting beside him on the bed. "About us." Thomas set his papers aside. "Is that good or bad?" Emma took his hand, tracing the lines of his palm with her finger. "I'm not sure yet, but it's something." He pulled her close, his arms warm and safe around her. "Something is a start," he murmured against her hair. Emma closed her eyes, breathing in the familiar scent of him. Yes, a start, and perhaps, just perhaps, the beginning of something beautiful. The chocolate cake evening marked a turning point. Small changes began to appear in their daily life together. Lisa started joining Emma in the kitchen, watching quietly as she prepared meals. Kate would sit in the living room while Thomas read the newspaper, occasionally asking questions about news stories. The silences became less heavy, more comfortable. One rainy Saturday, Emma was sorting through boxes in the garage when she found her old art supplies. Paintbrushes, watercolors, and sketchbooks from years ago when she had dreamed of becoming an artist. Life had pulled her in different directions, but she had never been able to throw these treasures away. Emma carried the dusty box inside, wiping it clean with a damp cloth. She hadn't painted in years, but something made her open the watercolor set, testing if the paints were still good. Lost in thought, she didn't notice Lisa standing in the doorway, watching with curious eyes. "You paint?" Lisa's voice was soft but clear. Emma looked up, surprised. "I used to, a long time ago." Lisa stepped closer, looking at the watercolors with interest. "Why did you stop?" The question was innocent but hit Emma hard. Why had she stopped? Work, marriage, life, all good things, but somehow her art had been set aside, forgotten like the box in the garage. "I'm not sure," Emma admitted honestly. "Sometimes we put things away, thinking we'll come back to them later." Lisa nodded as if she understood perfectly. She reached out, touching a brush with gentle fingers. "My mom painted. She taught me a little before she got sick." It was the first time Lisa had mentioned her mother. Emma held very still, afraid to break the moment. "Would you like to try these?" Emma offered, pushing the box slightly toward the girl. "The paints are probably still good." Lisa hesitated, then nodded. "Maybe you could show me how?" "I don't remember much of what Mom taught me." That afternoon, they sat at the kitchen table with paper and paints spread between them. Emma showed Lisa how to mix colors, how to create washes of sky and sea. Lisa's hand was naturally talented, her focus intense as she worked. By dinner time, they had created several small paintings and made a happy mess. Thomas found them there, laughing over Lisa's attempt to paint a cat that looked more like a lumpy potato. He stood in the doorway, watching with a smile that made Emma's heart warm. Later, as they cleaned up together, his hand caught hers. "You're painting again," he said softly. Emma nodded. "It feels good. I'd forgotten how much I loved it." Thomas kissed her temple. "You're glowing, Em." The next day, Emma heard music coming from upstairs. Following the sound, she found Kate in her room, a battered guitar across her lap. The girl stopped playing immediately when Emma appeared. "Don't stop," Emma said quickly. "That was beautiful." Kate looked down at the guitar. "My dad bought it for me when I was 12. I'm not very good." "You sounded wonderful to me," Emma said, leaning against the doorframe. "Thomas plays a little too. He has a guitar somewhere." Kate looked up, surprised. "Mr. Clark plays?" Emma smiled. "He does. And you can call him Thomas, you know. Both of you." There was a moment of silence before Kate spoke again. Would he mind showing me some chords sometime?" That evening, Thomas pulled his old guitar from the closet. He and Kate sat in the living room, heads bent over their instruments. Their voices were low as Thomas showed her finger positions for different chords. Lisa and Emma sat at the table nearby, working on a new painting. The house felt warm and alive in a way Emma had never experienced before. At bedtime, Kate stopped by their bedroom door where Emma was folding laundry. "Thanks," she said simply, "for the guitar lesson." Emma smiled. "He loved it. He hasn't played in ages." Kate nodded, then added softly, "Lisa hasn't painted since our mom died. Not until yesterday." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Before Emma could respond, Kate had disappeared down the hall. Thomas found Emma sitting on their bed, staring at nothing. He sat beside her, taking her hand in his. "What's on your mind, love?" Emma told him what Kate had said. "We're bringing things back to each other, Tom. Things we had all lost." Thomas wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "That's what families do, Em. They help each other find the pieces." Emma rested her head against his chest, listening to his steady heartbeat. "Is that what we're becoming, a family?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "Would that be so bad?" Emma looked up at him, seeing in his eyes the same hope she felt growing in her own heart. "No," she whispered. "Not bad at all." 3 months passed in this new rhythm of life. The girls had started school, and their bedroom walls now held paintings and posters. Lisa's artwork covered the refrigerator door. Kate had joined the school choir, her voice growing stronger with each practice session at home with Thomas. Emma was washing dishes one evening when the phone rang. Thomas answered it in the living room where he was helping Lisa with her math homework. Kate was upstairs practicing a new song. Emma heard Thomas's voice change, becoming more serious. She dried her hands and walked to the doorway, watching his face as he spoke. When he hung up, he looked troubled. "What is it?" Emma asked. Thomas motioned her to follow him to the kitchen, away from Lisa's ears. "That was Miss Jenkins," he said quietly. "They found the girl's relative, a second cousin in California. She's willing to take them." Emma felt as if the floor had dropped away beneath her feet. "Take them? When?" "She's flying in next week to meet them." Thomas's voice was flat, his eyes searching Emma's face. "If all goes well, the girls could be moving by the end of the month." The dish Emma was holding slipped from her fingers, shattering on the floor. The noise brought Lisa running from the living room and Kate hurrying down the stairs. "What happened?" Kate asked, looking at the broken pieces. "Just an accident," Emma said, forcing a smile. "Nothing to worry about." But the concern in Kate's eyes told Emma she wasn't fooled. The girl had always been too observant, too quick to sense trouble. That night, after the girls were in bed, Emma and Thomas sat on the back porch swing. The spring air was cool, and Thomas wrapped a blanket around their shoulders, pulling Emma close to his side. "What are we going to do, Tom?" Emma's voice was barely a whisper. Thomas sighed, his breath visible in the cool night air. "We always knew this was temporary, Em." Emma turned to look at him, but that was before. Before we became, she couldn't finish the sentence. "A family," Thomas said softly, completing her thought. They sat in silence, the swing moving gently back and forth. Stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky. "I can't bear to lose them," Emma finally said. "Not now." Thomas took her hand under the blanket. "Me neither." The week passed too quickly. Emma found herself watching the girls at every moment, trying to memorize the sound of Kate's laugh, the way Lisa hummed while she painted. She made all their favorite meals, as if good food could somehow keep them from leaving. The day before the cousin was due to arrive, Emma woke early to find Thomas already gone from bed. She found him in the kitchen, making coffee with reddened eyes. "You've been crying," she said, touching his cheek. Thomas didn't deny it. "I heard Lisa crying last night. I went to check on her, and Kate told me they don't want to go." Emma's heart leaped. "They said that?" Thomas nodded. Kate asked if they had a choice. "I didn't know what to tell her." Emma paced the small kitchen. "Do they have a choice? Do we?" Before Thomas could answer, the phone rang. It was early, not yet 7. Thomas answered, his face growing increasingly serious as he listened. "What is it?" Emma asked when he hung up. "Miss Jenkins. The cousin called her last night. She's changed her mind. She's not coming." Emma felt a confusing mix of relief and worry. "So what happens now?" Thomas set his coffee down and took both of Emma's hands in his. "That depends on us, Em." Miss Jenkins asked if we would consider a more permanent arrangement. Emma's breath caught. "You mean?" "Adoption," Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion. She asked if we would consider adopting the girls. Emma felt tears fill her eyes. "What did you tell her?" Thomas smiled, his own eyes wet. "I told her I needed to talk to my wife, but that I couldn't imagine our lives without those girls in it." Emma threw her arms around his neck, holding him tight. "Neither can I," she whispered against his shoulder. "Neither can I." Emma and Thomas decided to talk to the girls that evening. They ordered pizza, a special treat that both Lisa and Kate loved. As they sat around the dining table, Emma noticed how natural it felt now, the four of them together. She caught Thomas's eye and saw he was thinking the same thing. After dinner, instead of clearing the dishes, Thomas cleared his throat. "Girls, we have something important to talk to you about." Kate immediately tensed, her hand reaching for Lisa's under the table. Emma had seen this protective gesture many times over the past months. Whenever Kate sensed trouble, she reached for her sister. "Is it about the cousin?" Kate asked, her voice steady though her fingers had tightened around Lisa's. "We know she was supposed to come tomorrow." Emma looked at Thomas, surprised. The girls had known all along. "Miss Jenkins told us last week," Kate explained, seeing their surprise. "She thought we should be prepared." Thomas nodded slowly. "Yes, it's about that. But there's been a change of plans. Your cousin called last night. She's not coming." Lisa's eyes widened. Where will we go now? Her small voice trembled. Emma reached across the table, placing her hand over the girl's joined ones. That's what we want to talk to you about. You see, Ms. Jenkins asked us if we would consider a more permanent arrangement. What does that mean? Lisa asked, looking from Emma to Thomas. Thomas leaned forward, his eyes gentle. It means we want to adopt you, both of you, if that's something you would want too. The room went very quiet. Emma could hear the ticking of the clock in the hallway, the far-off sound of a neighbor's dog barking. Kate was the first to speak. You want us to stay, forever. Forever, Emma confirmed, her voice catching on the word. We want to be a family. A real family. Lisa's face broke into a smile so bright it nearly hurt to look at. She jumped up from her chair and ran to Emma, throwing her arms around her neck. Yes, yes, please. Emma held the girl close, feeling her small body shake with happy tears. Over Lisa's shoulder she looked at Kate, who hadn't moved. Kate, Thomas asked gently, how do you feel about this? Kate looked down at her hands, now alone on the table. You really want both of us? Not just Lisa? The question broke Emma's heart. She reached out her hand to Kate, still holding Lisa with her other arm. We want both of you. There's no Emma and Thomas without Kate and Lisa anymore. Not for us. Something in Kate's face seemed to crack then, the careful mask she had worn for so long finally falling away. She stood up slowly, then walked around the table to Thomas. For a moment she stood there, uncertain, then she leaned down and hugged him. Thomas closed his eyes, wrapping his arms around her, holding her as if she might break. Thank you, Kate whispered, loud enough for Emma to hear. For wanting us. Thomas looked at Emma over Kate's shoulder, his eyes shining with tears. We're the lucky ones, he said. That night, for the first time, the girls didn't go straight to their room after dinner. Instead, all four of them curled up on the couch to watch a movie. Lisa fell asleep halfway through, her head on Emma's lap. Kate stayed awake until the end, sitting next to Thomas, occasionally asking questions about the plot. As the credits rolled, Kate looked at Thomas. Does this mean we'll have your last name? Clark. Thomas smiled. If you want, or you can keep Morgan, or maybe both. Morgan Clark. Kate tested the sound of it. Kate Morgan Clark. She nodded, approving. And you'll be our dad, and Emma will be our mom. Emma felt her heart swell at the word mom. She had given up hope of ever hearing it directed at her. If that's what you want to call us, Thomas said. We'd be honored. Kate was quiet for a moment, thinking. I think my dad would be glad it's you, she finally said. He always said you were a good man. Thomas had to clear his throat before he could speak. Your dad was a good man too. And we'll make sure you both always remember him. Emma looked at the sleeping Lisa, at Kate's thoughtful face, at Thomas's gentle smile. This was their family now, not what any of them had expected, but somehow exactly what they all needed. I think, Emma said softly, this calls for ice cream. And so, late on a Tuesday night, they ate ice cream in their pajamas and talked about the future, their future, together. 6 months later, Emma stood in the courthouse hallway straightening Thomas's tie. Her fingers trembled slightly as she smoothed the blue silk against his chest. Are you nervous? He asked, catching her hand and holding it against his heart. Emma smiled up at him. A little. Is that silly? After all this time? Thomas shook his head. Not silly at all. This is a big day. Kate and Lisa sat on a nearby bench, both wearing new dresses. Kate had insisted on doing Lisa's hair, braiding it in an intricate pattern that had taken nearly an hour that morning. Lisa couldn't stop swinging her feet, her excitement too big to contain in her small body. Ms. Jenkins appeared at the end of the hallway, waving a folder. We're all set, she called. Judge Williams is ready for you now. The courtroom was smaller than Emma had imagined, warm with wood paneling and morning sunlight streaming through tall windows. A few of their friends sat in the back rows, neighbors, Thomas's colleagues, and Emma's sister who had flown in for the occasion. The judge, a kind-faced woman with silver hair, smiled as they entered. The Morgan Clark family, she announced, looking at her papers. What a pleasure to see you all today. The ceremony itself was brief but beautiful. The judge asked Thomas and Emma if they were committed to providing a loving home for Kate and Lisa, to supporting them through all of life's challenges, to being their parents in every sense of the word. They answered with firm voices, "We are." Then the judge turned to the girls. "And do you, Kate and Lisa, welcome Emma and Thomas as your parents, understanding that this creates a new family that is real and permanent?" Lisa nodded enthusiastically, then remembered she was supposed to speak. "Yes, I do." Kate's voice was quieter but no less certain. "Yes." The judge signed the final papers with a flourish. "By the power vested in me by the state, I hereby declare you a family in the eyes of the law." She smiled warmly. "Though it seems to me you became a family long before today." Outside the courthouse, they took pictures on the steps. Emma's sister insisted on capturing every combination, just the girls, just the parents, all four together. As Emma stood with her arms around her daughters, she caught Thomas looking at them with such love in his eyes that it took her breath away. That evening, they celebrated at home with a special dinner. Thomas had taken the day off work to prepare all their favorite foods. The dining table was decorated with flowers and candles, making their everyday space feel magical. As they ate, Lisa suddenly put down her fork. "I have something for you," she said, running to her room. She returned with 2 paintings carefully wrapped in tissue paper. "I made these. One for Mom and one for Dad." Emma unwrapped hers to find a beautiful watercolor of their house, with all 4 of them standing in front. Thomas's painting showed the backyard tree with a swing hanging from its branches. Both were signed in Lisa's careful handwriting, "With love from your daughter, Lisa Morgan Clark." Emma felt tears well up in her eyes. "They're beautiful, sweetheart." Kate cleared her throat. "I have something too." She seemed nervous as she handed Thomas a small, wrapped package. Inside was a CD. "I recorded some songs, with the guitar you taught me to play." Thomas held the CD carefully, as if it were made of glass. "I can't wait to listen to it. Can we play it now?" Lisa asked excitedly. As the first notes of Kate's guitar filled the room, followed by her clear, sweet voice singing a song about finding home, Emma reached for Thomas's hand under the table. They had been married for 15 years, but somehow it felt like their life together was just beginning. After the girls went to bed, Emma and Thomas sat on the porch swing, wrapped in the same blanket they had shared on the night they decided to become a family of 4. The stars were bright overhead, the spring air sweet with the scent of flowers. "Did you ever imagine this?" Emma asked, her head on Thomas's shoulder. "When you first came home and told me about Robert's daughters," Thomas was quiet for a moment. "I hoped," he finally said. "But I couldn't have imagined how perfect it would be." Emma smiled in the darkness. "Not perfect, but perfectly ours." Later that night, as they lay in bed, Thomas pulled Emma close. "You know what I was thinking in court today, when the judge was talking?" "What?" Emma murmured, already half asleep. "That when I asked you to marry me all those years ago, I was only seeing a small piece of the journey. I couldn't see this day coming, these girls becoming ours." His voice was soft in the darkness. "Thank you for saying yes, Em, to marriage, to the girls, to all of it." Emma kissed him gently. "Best yes I ever said." And down the hall, in their bedroom with the blue dresser and twin beds, 2 sisters slept peacefully, finally home.